Okay, so now we're going to solve a quadratic by another method. So this method is called completing the square. And I've got some steps over here. So I want you to take a look. I want you to think for a second. Sometimes people think this guy will factor, but the signs are off. It doesn't factor. And I can't use the square root property because b isn't 0. So I'm going to do something called completing the square. So the steps are written pretty much over there on the side. First thing you do is make the a value of 1. And I guess I need to remind you of that definition of a quadratic I gave you. So a couple of weeks ago, I gave you a definition of a quadratic equation. I even made you write it on the test. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. A cannot be 0. And so a is the guy that's hanging out in front of the squared variable, b is the guy hanging out in front of the x, and c is the number. So I'm going to use these terms a, b, and c a lot to explain completing the square. Oh, yay, the sun is out. Yay. I missed you, son. Okay, back to math. All right, so first thing you do is you make the value of a 1. Well, Merry Christmas. The value of a is 1. Step number 2 is to move c over. So I'm going to move the c over by adding 5 to both sides. So x squared plus 6x. Leave a space where the c was. So we're going to leave a space where the c was. All right, now here's why this method is called completing the square. I want to put a number right here. So that when it factors into identical parts. So I want to put a number here, and I want it to factor. I want the left side to factor. And I don't want it to factor into x plus 2, x plus 9, or x minus 3, x plus 7. I want the left side to factor into identical parts. I want the left side to factor into x plus 5, x plus 5, x minus 9, x minus 9, x plus 7, x plus 7. So I want you to think for a second, like, what number could I put there so that when I factor it, it would factor into identical parts? Hopefully you came up with 9. So if I put a plus 9 there, then the left side's going to factor. But this is the land of math. Like, if I'm going to add 9 to one side, I'm going to have to add 9 to the other side. That's often the most common mistake. I call this number the mystery number, and you have to add the mystery number to both sides. That's a very common mistake people make, is they will only add it to one side. So now the left side factors. What gives me x squared, x and x? What gives me 9 in a middle term of 6 plus 3 plus 3? Oh my gosh, that's identical parts. So we're going to say x plus 3 squared equals 14. Oh, now does it look familiar? Looks like a problem we worked a few minutes ago. Take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root cancel each other out. We get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 14, which will not break down. And we're going to minus my 3, and I get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 14. You just solved a quadratic that didn't factor. So all last quarter, every quadratic we encountered had to factor. In fact, I pointed that out to y'all several times. And so now we don't. Now, I know I kind of glazed over how you came up with the 9, and there is a formula for how to calculate the mystery number, but I kind of wanted y'all to think about that for a minute. So maybe we're going to work this next problem, and then we'll talk about like that formula, if you're wondering where the 9 came from. All right, so step number 1, make the value of a1. Merry Christmas, it is. Step number 2 is to move c over. And when you move c over, you have to leave a space where the c was. So step number 3, add the mystery number to both sides. So I need to put a number right here so that it will factor into a perfect square. That's why this lesson is called completing the square. You are putting a number there that makes it a perfect square. So I'll give you a second. What number could that be? Well, the number's 1. So I'm going to add 1 here, and I'm going to add 1 here. And then, let's see if that works. What gives me x squared? X and x. What's going to give me 1 in a middle term of 2 is plus 1 plus 1. Oh my gosh, that's x plus 1 squared. And negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. Okay, now it's downhill from here. We're going to take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root cancel each other out. So we get x plus 1 equals, oh my goodness, the square root of negative 8. That's going to be plus or minus 2i square root of 2. And then minus your 1, and you get negative 1 plus or minus 2i square root of 2. We just solved another quadratic. Now, let's go back up here and talk about this formula. Like, how did I get the 9 and the 1? And what if you weren't able to come up with the 9 or the 1? Well, if you weren't able to come up with the 9 or 1, don't worry. It turns out there's a formula, and we're going to all have to use the formula for this next guy. All of us. All right, so how do you calculate the mystery number? You calculate the mystery number by taking half of b and squaring it. So let's go look. Half of 6 is 3, and when you square 3, you get 9. So that's why I added 9 to both sides, and it made it factor into an identical square. And then let's look at this one. Half of 2 is 1, and then you square it and you get 1. So that's why 1 is my mystery number. All right, so these two guys were what I call easy completing the square problems. So now I'm gonna stop the video and we'll work. This guy is a medium, and this guy can be kind of hard. So we'll stop the video, we'll work easy and medium in the next video.